The year 1864 marked the beginning of the Wild Horse Gold Rush, taking place at Wild Horse Creek at the base of Mount Fisher. The mining town of Fisherville was comprised primarily of white and Chinese miners, both working very hard to pull gold-rich ore from the earth. Today, Fisherville stands as a beautiful wooded hiking trail dotted with small markers of past settlement that have survived the elements for generations. So let's take a hike up to and through the town of Fisherville and show you a little bit of history on today's episode of History Bits. Upon entering Fisherville, you'll come up across a small parking area for you to park your wagon or stagecoach, or even just your horse and hitch them to a tree. Here you make the decision whether you want to follow the old Dudeny Trail through Fisherville, or possibly turn back and go view the man-carved valley made from hydraulic mining. Let's follow the old Dudeny Trail first. The Dudeny Trail finished construction in the year 1865, stretching all the way from Hope, BC to the Wild Horse Creek. It provided a direct link to the colonial capital of New Westminster, and it will take us through the town of Fisherville. Here we cross the mountain road, taking us up to the Chinese burial ground. Now, it was custom for most Chinese people to be buried with their ancestors. Thus, if one was to be laid to rest here in Fisherville, they were placed in a temporary burial ground here in these pits. This tiny path shows us a small section of the burial ground, but there are larger sections if you follow the mountain road much higher. Although later the gold rush began to dwindle and some Euro-Canadian and American miners began to leave Fisherville, many Chinese miners stayed as they saw the potential in the gold-rich claim. Following the trail down leads us to what was the more settled area of Fisherville. While many structures have gone with the wind, there are a few remnants of past civilization, such as the Victoria Ditch. The Victoria Ditch was completed in 1865 and was used to provide water to some pacer claims that were high up off the riverbed and give some drinking water to the miners. Following the path further leads us to the grave of Thomas Walker. Tommy Walker is the only known victim of a shooting up at Fisherville. Now, there are many stories, rumors, and gossips about what actually happened to Tommy Walker, but to every gossip story, there is a grain of truth. Mr. Walker was playing a game of cards with several gentlemen, one of them including a Bill Brewmeister. Brewmeister accused Mr. Walker of cheating and thus pulled out his pistol and pointed it at Mr. Walker. Mr. Walker pulled out his own and pointed it at Bill. All the other men playing cards pulled out their pistols and pointed them at each other. A shot rang off. Tommy fell dead. Bill Brewmeister was accused of murdering Tommy, yet there was no evidence to prove this claim. He was asked to leave town by Bob Dorr, one of the primary claim owners up at Fisherville and one of the richer folks in town. Tommy Walker's grave can be seen here, where he's laid to rest, with a small plaque commemorating the incident. Let's continue up the trail, shall we? Possibly to a slightly sweeter story. This location marks the first apple orchard known in the East Kootenays, planted by a man called David Griffiths. Each of these 4 apple trees required a lot of attention to be able to bear fruit. Each tree requiring a pail of water each day, which David Griffiths sourced himself from the Victoria Ditch, which ran right past his house. When they bore fruit, he would pick all the apples and bring them to nearby Fort Steele to sell them. Now, why don't we follow along the path and go see what remains of Mr. Griffith's home. This fireplace is the largest standing structure that remains in Fisherville, marking the center of what was Mr. Griffith's home. The shale used to build the fireplace was sourced by Mr. Griffiths himself, bringing it all the way up from the riverbed, which is several hundred meters below. The same shale can be seen lining the perimeter of Mr. Griffith's home, and the steps leading downwards to the Tinfield, which we will get to in a moment. Mr. Griffiths ran a post office out of his home for several years, as well as overseeing the said Tinfield. Walking down the old stone steps, we can see what is presumed to be Mr. Griffith's garden, as well as the remnants of the Victoria Ditch. Let's go take a look at his Tinfield. The Tinfield served as almost a reuse recycle station for all the residents of Fisherville. Whenever a miner or a visitor was done with a piece of tinware, they would simply throw it in the fields. And when someone was in need of some tinware, they would scour the fields and look for the piece they needed, simply taking it home. This system provides a hint of truth to the old saying, one man's junk is another man's treasure. Further down the road lay the remnants of the old government building, where mining records would have been kept, claims would have been dealt, and other business regarding the minings would have taken place. Now, not much remains except some old boards and nails. Walking up past the parking lot now where our horse is still hitched, we come up across the cemetery where several individuals still lay at rest, having been buried here in Fisherville for many years. Following the trail down further leads us to the old lookout where the hydraulic mining scars on the Wild Horse can still be seen. Let's go take a look, shall we? This lookout serves as a small example of the damage done by hydraulic mining in the mid-19th century. Hydraulic mining back then was done by the use of a water cannon called a water monitor. Water monitors worked on the principle of taking water from a large diameter pipe and shrinking it down to a small diameter nozzle, drastically increasing the pressure. This water was then used to rip down the hillside, dirt, stones, and all the precious metals within, to later be washed and sluiced for gold. Due to the destructive nature of these tools, they were later outlawed on the Wild Horse Creek. But the damage still remains. Hiking back up the trail to the parking lot where our mode of transportation remains hitched, this concludes the tour of Fisherville. If you have any questions about Fisherville or any of the historical events surrounding the place, please leave a like, drop a comment down below in the comment section, and subscribe to Fort Steele Heritage Town. You, of course, yourself could go take a hike of Fisherville. If you need directions, please leave a comment or send us an email at info@fortsteele.bc.ca. Thank you very much for joining me on today's episode of History Bits.